Welcome back, everybody. We're on to our next week, our next unit. And this week we're going to talk about interview basics, and definitely we're going to talk about basics here. But I find this to be probably the most fascinating part of investigations. It's the part that I love the most. Look, writing an investigative plan, you've all done it, and it is hugely important, and we all have to do it if we're going to do our jobs right. But frankly, it's not the most exciting thing in the world to do. I like the setting the stage and the actual interviews themselves. It's just kind of, my sweet spot for this. And I also like writing up the reports, believe it or not, because I think that's, really important that you get all the facts down and get them straight. And I just like to write, I guess. But interview basics is this week's topic. And let's talk a little bit about what we learned so far on the setting up of the interview so we can start on the right foot. So in last week's unit, we talked about the place and setting of interviews, and they need to match the witness. If you take away anything from that, know that the place that you interview somebody really needs to match the type of interview you're doing. A witness supportive location, the person's office, is great if they're providing information to you, right? If it's the accountant who's helping you with a fraud investigation, and you're meeting with them in their office, is a great way to do it. Otherwise, if you meet in yours, they're going to be constantly running back and forth. It's just a matter of logistics. Any of the tools they need to provide you information. And remember, they are a witness. There are eyewitnesses, and there are witnesses that provide just information to help you build your case. They are still considered witnesses in our case, right? They're not otherwise involved. They're providing information. Having them in their office is a perfect place. Eyewitnesses, potential suspects, and subjects, on the other hand, should be interviewed in a neutral location or investigator supportive environment, depending on the look of that. And by that I mean, I work from home now, but for years I worked out of different offices in different parts of the country. I've always been U.S. based, but the role's global, so I'll go places and work out of hoteling offices, as they call them, right? But in my offices, I didn't hang up certificates. Every time you go to different trainings and different courses, you get certificates, and you should be very proud of those things, your Slippery Rock degree being one of them. But be very careful if your Slippery Rock degree says that you are, a corporate security specialist. That may not be enough to turn somebody, but certainly I have certificates that say I have advanced credentials in interrogation. If I'm going to invite somebody in my office to have an interview with them, I don't want that hanging on the wall next to me when they're talking to me and they're looking up and they're seeing that. Remember the distractions. That can be a major distraction too. So, the investigator supportive environment, meaning your office in most cases, is easy for you, but you really got to make sure that you don't have things lying around like, your Officer of the Year award and your credentials on interrogation and interviewing and, books on the subject all around, that this person is going to get the clue that maybe you're not going to be as easy a conversation as they'd hoped. So the neutral locations are really where we want to be. We talked about those, getting them out of the way, keeping down the distractions, the seating arrangement for people and with observers. So let's go from that and start to talk about the interviews themselves. So why do I say basic interview techniques? Well, because there are so many techniques out there, so many different strategies, so many different ways of doing things, and some of them are contradictory, quite frankly. You can't learn them all in 15 weeks. You can't learn them all in certainly the 2 weeks or 2.5 I'm hoping to dedicate to this subject. Although we will be talking about interviews in every unit going forward in some fashion. They're related back to this interview process. But, 15 years, okay, you'll get really good at it if you do it enough. But 15 weeks, you're not. We're going to talk about some very basic techniques. I'm only going to give you a few, but I just want you to get a flavor for some of the ones that have been more successful for me and for others. Witnesses who are supplying artifacts, basic info, they're really just conversations. So we don't need to really employ a lot of interview techniques to those. They're a business conversation. I'm coming to you as the person who runs the access control system for my facility, and I want to know when Bob came and left the week of November 10th. I don't need a technique to talk to you. I only need to tell you that what I'm working on is confidential and that you are bound by confidentiality agreement with the corporation, and therefore what we discuss stays with us. And then I just ask you for what I need. So when it comes to those types of witnesses, there is no special way to talk to those types of witnesses. They're going to be cooperative because they have nothing to hide. They're simply providing you with artifacts and information. The big challenge comes when you have reluctant witnesses, and essentially when you've determined that your witness is indeed your subject. And normally you will know that before you go in, although something could turn in an interview that really, lights your eyes up and says, oh, I got him right here, right? For the most part, your other evidence will be very supportive. That's why you stick with that investigative plan to get everything aligned before you go into the interview. But we're going to concentrate really on the reluctant witnesses and suspect and subject interviews, because those are the ones that are hardest to navigate. So, the first thing you do in an interview is an introduction. Even if you know this person, even if this is somebody you run into the hallway with, or you may even work on projects with, you have different roles generally as a security manager, and most security managers will be doing these types of interviews, if not done by HR, compliance, or someone else, depending on the topic. But if you're doing it as an investigation, you need to introduce yourself in that role. I am the security investigator. I'm authorized to conduct investigations on behalf of the company, and I report to the CEO, the board, and people under them as the results of my investigations. You are telling them what hat you're wearing, and it is very important that you do that. Because if they think you're doing that because, you're the security manager and they say, well, I didn't realize he was investigating me or somebody else, that's going to come back to haunt you. So introduce yourself as the investigator. Almost every company has some sort of ethics, values, behavioral training. It's very common nowadays, right? You go through it. In my own company, we refer to it as the blue book, because there's an orange book for salespeople and a blue book for everybody else, about what your responsibilities are to the company. The difference being salespeople are more subject to bribery, and they also have to detail their products when it comes to pharmaceuticals only in light of what the product's approved for. So they have a couple of different standards that wouldn't apply to other people, but almost every company has some sort of training on ethics, behavior, the way the company interacts and way you interact with other people. Oftentimes in that, there is a section on cooperating with investigations, but even if there's not, remind people that they took that ethics or values training. And in fact, if available to you, go look up when they took it last. Because it's a very nice leverage when you say, now, last October, if you remember correctly, you took the values and behavior training that everybody at the company had. Or when you were hired, I went back and checked, and you did indeed sign saying that you would, behave in line with our company values. I appreciate that very much. Also understand that, this isn't like Law and Order. You don't have the right to take the Fifth Amendment. And the reason they don't have the right to take the Fifth Amendment is the Fifth Amendment, as you probably know, only applies to government questioning. You can't take the Fifth Amendment when you're talking to a corporate investigator. Now, that doesn't mean you have to answer. However, if you refuse to answer, it could be grounds for dismissal. So in a perfect world, if you're in a courtroom or you're being questioned by someone by the government, right, by police, you say, I'd rather not answer. I want a lawyer. I plead the Fifth Amendment, self-incrimination. And no one technically should make that assumption that that means you are guilty of anything, only that you just decide you don't want to talk to the government. When it comes to talking to your employer or talking to a corporate investigator, you can't say, I'm taking the Fifth. The Fifth doesn't apply. You can say, I refuse to answer that question. And the investigator can say, okay, that's unfortunate, but thank you for your time today. Why don't you go ahead and come with me and we'll grab your things and we'll put you on suspension until we determine the next steps. And the step could very well be that you didn't cooperate in the investigation, and whether you're guilty of anything else or not, that is enough to terminate you. So the taking the Fifth is a whole different thing, right? Taking the Fifth is government questioning. When a corporate investigator questions you, you either answer or they do have the recourse to say that you're being non-cooperative, and that can have its own punishment. But once you give those admonishments, they sound very official. And you should probably write out a statement, much along the lines of what I've got here. But then when you're done, I've always found that if I smile, I say, I'm glad that's out of the way now. That's all the official stuff, right? Now we can, kind of have our talk. And that puts the person a little bit more at ease. So you have taken care of advising them who you are and why you're there, reminding them that they have the absolute responsibility to be honest and not have omissions because they've taken that training and agreed to it, or they've signed that when they first were hired in. And if your company doesn't do that, then that's unfortunate. Make sure they do, right? It's something you need to talk to HR about. and then understand that they have that they can't take the Fifth Amendment, right? But then you got to now go back to okay, now we're going to just have a conversation, because you got to put them back at ease. You've taken care of that. And also, if there's a lawyer in the room, hopefully the lawyer will then give the upjohn advisement, which we talked about last week. So get all the official stuff done. But my advice to you is, when that's all done, kind of smile and say, okay, now we're done with that official stuff. All right, let's have a conversation. So every interview needs a kickstart, or the first answer is going to be, I don't know anything about that. You never want to be in that position. The first answer you get has to be a piece of information or an affirmation. Never let it be a negative, and never let it be a single no. We're investigating the matter of the break-in of the soda machine in Building 2 last week. And we used that as our example, right? Are you aware of the incident, or have you ever been in the break room, or have you ever heard anybody say anything about this matter, even in just casual conversation? Now, if this person is an employee of the company, right, and Building 2, we'll assume that this is a mid-sized company, right? They've been in the break room, right? You could even add, have you ever been in the break room, or know anybody that's ever been in that break room, right? The answer to the question is going to be yes. It's going to be an affirmative, okay? And it opens up another question. So are you aware of the incident? You ever been in that break room? Know anybody that's been in the break room? Heard anything from anybody about the matter, even just in casual conversation? The likely answer you're going to get from that is, well, yeah, I have. Okay, well, let's talk about that. Tell me about that. And then they will say, well, I heard a couple of guys on the shop floor talking and saying that somebody broke into the pop machine and soda machine. Sorry, I'm a Midwesterner now. The soda machine. And, break time, they were going to have to run to McDonald's to get something to drink, because that's the only soda machine in the building. That opens up the conversation. They are now sharing. But if you say, do you know anything about, somebody broke in the soda machine in Building 2 last week. You know anything about that? You are likely to get a no. Now you're backpedaling from jump. So your first question in any interview, be it a witness that would be an eyewitness, or someone that might have information other than artifacts and things, right? This is somebody who's going to offer up some information you can build on. Always needs to be in the affirmative. Always look for some sort of a yes or an open-ended answer that gives you that sharing opportunity in that first question. It will start the conversation. So we're still with that relatively friendly witness, right? Potential eyewitness, potentially a witness who may have seen or heard something that you can use. Not somebody who's sharing artifacts generally. You're going to try to ask open-ended questions. Now, most books you will read on this subject always say only ask open-ended questions. And unfortunately, that's just not possible. Remember, when somebody answers a question, it's going to open up another question for you. You can't have them all written down. I think it's smart for you to write down questions that you plan to ask, that you need answers to, and write them in a way so that they're open-ended. And by open-ended, what do I mean? Well, I can ask you, what might be a reason someone would do this? Rather than ask you, do you know why someone might do this? We're kind of asking the same thing. But if I ask you, do you know why someone might do this? No, I don't know why anybody would do something stupid like that. We're done. If I ask, what might be a reason someone would do this? You might say, well, I don't really know. I don't really know. Well, what might be a reason? I'm asking an open-ended question. I'm not asking you for the reason. I'm asking you what might be a reason. If nothing else, the person's going to say, well, I don't know, maybe they needed the money. Have them give you something. You are trying for that sharing opportunity here, right? That's your foothold. So when you can use open-ended questions, they are best. But it's only really going to be able to be used when they fit the time and the questioning line, right? When they fit in. They don't always work. Sometimes it's a yes or no answer when you get down to, refining your questions, and that's okay. So don't get hung up on open-ended questions, which is something that most books on this subject will just insist upon. You can ask something like, were you or was anyone you know involved in any way with the incident in break room? Not saying, asking if you did it or if they did it, but rather do you have any information about those who might be able to help clear the matter? I'm asking for partnership in that question. I'm looking for additional leads in that question. I'm understanding their involvement. It is unlikely that they will say nothing, right? I don't know anything. because you wouldn't have brought them in if that were the case. You have something, some reason you asked them to come in. They're part of a work group, and work groups talk, right? They happened to be in that building that night, and there were very few people when this soda machine, was broken into, right? They're not likely to say, I have absolutely nothing to add. You're looking for their help. You're asking for partnership, and you're trying to continue the conversation to support that investigative plan. Remember, your investigative plan is going to give you a list of questions, things that you need to be able to prove, right? And you're going to pull questions that you're going to ask people about those. And so you really want to continue on that path of the investigative plan with this witness who is not a suspect, and you really want to get into a partnership of conversation. That's hugely important. There's one question or small set of questions that you should always ask about midway through in any interview. And that is, when we identify the person responsible for breaking into the soda machine, what, in your opinion, should happen to them? A reasonable person would say in the workplace, when we find a person who broke into the soda machine and stole the money, a reasonable person would say, well, they've got to be fired. They can't be trusted. But if someone says, well, I don't know, it really depends on why they may have done it. They should have a second chance. Second chance is a huge indicator. When somebody in an interview suggests extreme leniency for the perpetrator of a wrongdoing, if it doesn't match the crime, right? We always talk about the punishment doesn't match the crime in the opposite direction, right? Some states have three felonies, and in Michigan, in fact, where I live, 3 felonies, and you do life. You commit 3 felonies, you do life. Well, if the first 2 were armed robbery and the third one was failure to pay child support, which can be a felony in the state, I'm not so sure that that punishment fits the crime. I may have put them into life sentence for second armed robbery because they're an idiot. However, that third one, gosh, is that really the thing we're going to put somebody in life for, right? They should certainly be punished, but I'm looking for rationality there. But in this case, when the leniency just doesn't match, right? I mean, the crime here, breaking into something, stealing money in the workplace, that's normally something people get fired for. But when they say, I think they should maybe get a second chance, I don't know, maybe they should definitely be written up and this should be their final warning. What they're actually telling you is either they or someone they know or someone they suspect was involved in this, and it's someone that they are close with, that they have a friendship with, and they believe that they are setting the stage for leniency with that statement. Huge commitment to the truth. If you find someone that gives you that second chance on answer to something that never should really get a second chance, the reasonable person test would say it doesn't, then you have a person who knows more about this, and you need to continue down that line of questioning. And perhaps they may even be a subject or a suspect, which is something that you need to consider at that point. So next we move on to a step called elimination and association. And especially if that person has given, the extreme leniency answer to your second chance question, now's the time to kind of hone in and see what they really know or who they really know. So a couple questions you can ask. Can you help me understand who was definitely not involved? And likely say, well, there's a whole lot of people. Okay, list them. Just go in your work group. And they will list people who are not involved in order. It is how the mind works. Well, it definitely wasn't Jim, and it couldn't have been Sally. She wasn't here that night anyway. Mary, no way. She's no. You get down to the work group, and then down toward the bottom of the list is really the ones that they potentially suspect. And you ask them, even if you have a gut feel, is there anyone I should be speaking with more directly on this matter? Whether or not they were involved or not, who should I be talking to? And it is very likely that it will be someone near the bottom of the list. It's because they have pulled out the least likely suspects to the most likely suspects in their mind as they list them when you asked who's not involved. Did they answer the question? Did they say, well, me for first? Because the mind certainly should be going to there at this point, right? When you ask who's not involved, did they mention themselves? Did they suggest others? In a small work group, We all know everybody, right? If something happens in the workplace, they all have a gut feeling. The minute they were told that a wrongdoing occurred, the human mind said, this is who I think is responsible for it. That is how the mind works. And so when they tell you who was not involved, when they list that list of names, start from the bottom and ask, should I be talking to this person? Might they have some information for me? And essentially what they've given you with that list is the least likely to the most likely suspect by simply going through a process of elimination in their mind. So if the person that you're interviewing, in your opinion at this point, is a non-suspect, right? You don't believe that your other evidence, you went in, with your investigative plan, you've gathered up all the rest of the artifacts and things, which we will talk about how to do that coming up here in the next weeks. But you've gone through that whole list of artifacts and information, and you determined they are not really a suspect, right? And this line of questioning that you've just gone through, at carrying on the conversation, right? It's really all it is carrying on a conversation, keep them talking, don't give them opportunities to shut down. They will likely name someone they suspect, and they might be incorrect, by the way. But your purpose with a non-suspect interview like this is not just fact-finding, but it's finding new leads and sources as well, which may or not be factual, may or not be correct, quite frankly. But you have a dual purpose when you're talking to non-suspects. You want to understand what they understand, but you also want to make some connections and understand who else you should be talking to. Who did you miss on your witness list, right? But what happens if you have a lot of information from evidence and artifacts that suggest the person you're talking to is indeed a suspect or subject of this investigation? This is a point now where you kind of pivot into a subject or suspect interview. Not an interrogation, still an interview, still the same business-like, confident, friendly conversation that you're carrying on, but you're going to pivot to a kind of a different line. So when you have the reasonable suspicion that you do have the suspect and or subject in your interview at that point, okay, you have strong documentary evidence, the artifacts, everything else, other interviews you've done, everything kind of points to this person. And now in the interview, for lack of a technical term here, they've gone squirrely on you, right? There's things they're saying, they're not adding up. You can tell they're being evasive. Ask this question: will you confirm that you did work during the time of the break-in and that you do have access to the break room? And the reason that you ask the opportunity question is if you don't have opportunity, you have no suspect. They had to have been able to do the crime in order to be the one who did the crime, right? Plain and simple. A circular argument there, right? You couldn't do it if you couldn't do it. You're asking for that opportunity question right there because if they say, well, no, I couldn't have. I didn't work that day. I took vacation. At that point, you need to stop and go back to your documentary evidence and either confront the person and say, well, I've got time records here that show you coming in and out, which, by the way, in an interview I did, and the person admitted to me that they had somebody else punch them in and out that day so they could get paid, and they were off doing something else. Just snowballed, right? But you need to go back to your documentary evidence, either in that interview or to say, okay, we're going to need to regroup here a little bit. What I'd like you to do is go back to work, and I will call you back in, or potentially suspend them if you really have enough evidence otherwise. Don't move forward if they dispute the opportunity, because you need to make sure you have solid documentary and other evidence, other witnesses that will put them available to have done this wrongdoing. It is the number one failure if you go past that opportunity. They say, no, it couldn't have been me because I wasn't here. And you start to argue and then find out they weren't. You're going to jam yourself up. So get the opportunity question out first when you're going toward a suspect and starting to pivot on this interview so that you can make sure that they at least admit that they were available and able to have committed the wrongdoing before you move any farther. So now you've pivoted to the suspect/subject interview. And we're going to start to plant seeds in something called baiting techniques. And it really, I don't like the term, but that's the term that's used. But it really is in some ways, you're baiting someone to bite on something that they find palatable. Okay? So let's think about some of the baiting technique questions. Is it possible you were in or around the break room when this matter occurred? Not saying you did it, but is it possible you were in that area? Well, if they were around and in the building, then it's probably possible they could have been there, right? If they were available that day in the workplace, they've answered the opportunity question. Then the answer is, well, I guess that's possible. Then maybe follow up with, I'm not saying this is the case, but is it possible the machine was left open and after opening the door to grab a soda, someone just decided to take the money? They didn't plan it, it just happened. I mean, is that possible? Well, of course that's possible. The answer is yes, that's possible. I mean, we don't know what happened exactly just yet, right? We don't know what the motivation was, but that is absolutely a possibility. What you're doing is you are offering possibilities of what could have transpired. If this person is indeed your subject and you are of high confidence that indeed you have the right person, you are going to need them to agree to some reason that they did this. And remember our why. We don't care why. What you're trying to do is to get them to take a why that they find palatable, that makes them less evil, right? They've done something wrong. They want to save face. That's what we use baiting techniques for. So in your baiting techniques, you're really trying to offer an explanation. Some way for the person who did it to save face. You know, I'm not saying this is the case, but could this just been a momentary lapse in someone's judgment because the machine was left open, right? Maybe the machine took the person's money. You know how those machines are. They take your money all the time and, you know, bang on the machine. Like all of a sudden we shake the machine and nothing comes out. It's very frustrating. And, you know, look, if that's the case, I don't know, maybe because it looks like a screwdriver was used to open it. Maybe somebody just had a screwdriver. They were trying to, you know, to get the machine to work so that when everybody came for break, they could, you know, they could use the soda machine and, you know, the thing just popped open and maybe they just left it popped open and somebody else came and took the money. You know, trying to figure a way that this could have happened. You know, maybe somebody really legitimately, you know, found the machine open and, you know, when they put their money in, nothing came out. They rattled the machine. The door was open. They opened it up and they said, well, yeah, let me take my screwdriver. I'm a maintenance guy. And they were fiddling around with the coin box. It popped open. Machine still didn't work. They closed it up. They walked away and somebody else came and took the money. You're giving them an excuse as to why they may have been involved. We don't care whether or not what they accept and what they may admit to is true in this case. That may sound foreign to some of you. I don't care what the why is. I don't care why they did it. Right? Is it possible somebody's having such tremendous, you know, financial issues now, and everybody's scared because, you know, it's been layoffs of the company, and, you know, everybody's really just kind of scared right now. Maybe somebody just got frightened and took the money for that reason, and they'd never stole anything before, but now, you know, with all the pressures of the layoffs, people were getting scared. Maybe somebody just wanted to get their money back. You know, they got frustrated because every day for the last week that machine's taking their money. You keep offering explanations that are somewhat face-saving and palatable to that person. If indeed they are your subject, there is a likelihood that they will accept one of those as the reason they did it. You're giving them their why, right? Because we don't care what their why was. Our job is to simply prove that someone did it and that we have the right person and try to get an admission if we believe that the rest of our evidence points to this person. So you just keep honing in on that theme, right? On all those different possibilities of why it will happen. And you will likely, if you have the right person, you will likely find one theme that they say, okay, I can accept that. It doesn't make me look like a bad person. It makes it look like bad circumstances. It makes it look like the machine was at fault. It makes it look like the company was at fault. Somebody else's fault as to why I did this. Just keep honing in on what they will accept. Right? Just keep going. But you have to exhaust the baiting before you move to any other steps. If you have gone to baiting technique, time is on your side. Right? There is no time limit to baiting. And in fact, sometimes it takes a very long time. Okay? If they accept the plausible scenario, if you can see, well, yeah, that's probably it. You know, when you get to that point, then you can move on to the next step, right? And you likely have the right subject. Sometimes it doesn't work. Before baiting, remember, you have strong evidence from the rest of your investigative plan, right? Based on other witnesses, artifacts, and documents. Keep honing in. Don't worry about the time. Time is on your side. You can continue on for a long time. It may take hours when you have that person there. And frankly, if they are engaged in that conversation, if they are listening to you for a prolonged period of time and they don't throw in the towel, it is even more likely that they are looking for that palatable way out of this thing. And they see you as trying to help them find it. You just haven't hit the right note yet. If they still, however, deny it, they just keep saying, no, you're not getting anywhere, and you've exhausted the baiting. Okay? Police would move on to an interrogation phase. They thought they had the right person. We can't do that. Our investigation is done. Remember, they have the burden of proof. We only have the 7 proofs, which are much lighter. We've conducted a full investigation. We've talked to the right people. We have the right evidence, and we made a reasonable judgment. We don't have the burden of proof in a criminal case that the police have. And if we're confident in what we have, and they just continue to deny after the baiting techniques, and you've gone through every possible scenario with the exception of Martians coming to help them, steal from a machine, right, or forcing them to steal from it, then your investigation is done. And forcing an admission, getting to the point where they just say, fine, I did it, yeah, I did it for that reason, and they're just throwing in the towel that way, really is not a good admission. It's weak admissions, right, because you really want them to accept something. Okay? If you get anything from the baiting, and you keep the line going, time again is not the problem, keep it going. If they're close but just won't go over that edge to admit, it's time for something called a positive confrontation. A positive confrontation is where you suggest your evidence implicates that interviewee. You're going to lay your cards on the table, and there are certain reactions that are very much telltale when you do that. At that point, you have your artifacts and other evidence to point to this person. You've gone through all the baiting, and they just won't go, but they're close. You think they're close, right? They haven't shut down. They're still, waiting for you to come up with the right answer, but you just can't find it, right? Be patient, but if it doesn't, this is a statement that you make. We've collected a fair amount of evidence. We have witness accounts, photos, video, other artifacts around this matter. And unfortunately, our investigation has concluded that you were indeed involved in the matter, Bob. Basically, what you're saying is, everything we've talked about so far, you've been beating around the bush, but, basically, our investigation has concluded that you did it. You don't say, I know you did it, you know you did it, admit it. Don't ever do that, because now you've set up a negative confrontation, and a person is going to try to save face by arguing with you. You basically say in a business-like way, we've looked at all the evidence and everything's here, and in fact, you did it. In fact, you were involved in this matter. And you look for a magical statement that will often come and surprise you, but it shouldn't, because the more you do this, the more you hear it. I did, or I was. When they say that, they're basically, that's an admission in and of itself. And people do it all the time. Our investigation, we've kind of been through this, and we've done, basically we've done the science, and this is the way it is what you're saying. And they say, I did? Or, I was involved? Like, they question it. They know the answer. The only other answer is, no, I wasn't. And if they say, no, I wasn't, well, then, again, you're shut down. You say, okay, well, I think we're going to end the interview. And you have them suspended while you conduct the rest of the investigation and get everything together and look for determination from decision makers. But this is a pivot point in and of itself, where if they give any indication other than, hell no, I did not, then you start to pivot now, another pivot point, to reconciliation. So you're at the point of reconciliation. This is where you work with the subject to get the record on paper and help them build the information they want decision makers to see. They want to be seen in the best light. They don't want to be seen as just the guy who robbed the soda machine. They want to be seen as a victim in some ways, right? I did it because I needed the money because you don't pay me enough. I did it because I needed the money because my children are sick. I did it because the machine has always been ripping us off, and everybody said if they ever got the opportunity to get the money out of the machine, I was going to distribute it to everybody. I just never got the chance. They're looking for that, right? Now we're at the point of reconciliation where they said, I did. Well, yes, you did. So let's work together and try to, put this thing back together. And many times people will say, okay. It's just amazing to me that they do, but they do. So from this point forward, all denials are off the table, and they will try to back down at some point. So what we need to do is to start to put down on paper, what the circumstances were, what your motivation was, what you're going to do here to make this good, right? If they simply shut down, we're going to go to closure, which is the next step. But if they keep talking, keep moving on with the reconciliation. But every once in a while they will say, yeah, but I didn't do this, man. We're kind of past that now, Bob. You and I are going to work together to put the best light on this thing, because this is going to go to decision makers. And, with my report that says you indeed were involved. So you and I need to work together to put the best spin on this thing so that, it doesn't impact you in the worst possible way. I'm not making any promises. I'm not saying you're not going to get fired. I'm not saying the company's not going to say, call the police and put him in jail. I'm not saying any of those things. What I'm saying is that I'm going to help them put in the best light their involvement in this so that when it goes to decision makers, their story can be told. And when I say lather, rinse, repeat, just like the shampoo bottle, anytime they do a denial, no, we're past that point now. Just keep it right. We're past that point. That ship has already sailed. We're not at that point now. We're already past that. What we're working on is putting something down here that's going to, when I send my report forward, that your story gets told and they understand why you were involved, not just because you were a bad person, right? You're not a bad person. We just want you to be able to tell your story. And that will turn, again, many people will then start to turn a corner again to the point where they help you out in telling the story as to why they were involved in this incident. So let them lay out the answer. It could be based on the baiting questions. Somebody could have done this because they, that machine rips everybody off. And when they found the machine open, they said, I'm going to get everybody their money back and, distribute it out. I'm Robin Hood, right? If that's the one they accept, great. Again, I hate to sound cold-hearted, but who cares? Our job's to find out who did it, not why they did it. But let them explain why. Was it a financial reason? Lack of respect from the company, giving us one soda machine in one building and charging us $2 for a can of Coke, for God's sakes, or it just happened. I don't know why it happened, but it just did happen. Any reason, truthful or not, it's probably not going to be the real reason. The real reason why somebody breaks into a soda machine is to take the money. We all know that, right? But if they say it's because they needed the money for, their 10 sick children, well, okay. Who cares if they only have one child and that child's perfectly healthy? I don't care. Put down you had 20 sick children. What you're telling me is you did it. And I'm getting a written response to that because we're going to start to write this stuff down, okay? Doesn't matter the reason, truthful or not. One thing that I found very helpful when you get to reconciliation like this is to have them write out the events. Give them a pad and a pen. And I always suggest they structure this as a letter to decision makers. Dear HR manager, dear department head, dear CEO, or somebody by name that's in their chain of command. I did it because of this. If something changed, I would not have done it. Make sure they, tell them, look, be apologetic. Tell them you're sorry you did it. That, you think you're worth a second chance. Tell them you're going to pay back the loss and tell them how you're going to pay it back. Look, there was $190 stolen out of the soda machine, and if you had to do over again, you never would have done it. I'm really sorry, and I'll pay it back. $19 out of my next 10 paychecks. I'll pay it back with interest. The agreement to restitution is not binding, and it's not a decision point really for anything. But again, it is strengthening their admission. No one agrees to pay somebody something back if they don't owe them that. If they agree to pay the money back, that means they took the money in the first place. It just adds to the admission. Structuring it as a letter, most people understand how a letter is written. They write it first person, dear so-and-so. They're writing it. They're making their plea for leniency. You only make a plea for leniency when leniency is required, right? So structured as a letter, I think that works best. So now you're at the point of closure. You've got that written letter. And I want you to always remember to ask one more question. And there's a reason for this. And it's only worked for me one time. And it opened up a huge investigation. Quite frankly, it was the son of Sam, if you will. It was the son of the investigation, right? That was a minor one that ended up being a major. But ask this question, and compliment the person. I really appreciate your truthfulness and candor here today. You've done the right thing. Is there anything else I'm missing? Not just regarding this matter. Is there anything else I should know about the workplace? Other stuff's going on. Anything you need to get off your chest. You've been really cooperative with me today. It's taken us a while, but we've gotten here. And look, you've written this thing out. You've been very remorseful. I think this is going to put you in a good light. But look, is there anything else related to this or not? Get it off your chest now. This is your chance for the clean slate. And you might be shocked as to what that person will tell you. I met a gentleman named Ed Gelb once, and Ed is a polygraph operator. Polygrapher. Yeah. I think it sounds like something that's illegal, but he operates a polygraph, right? Does the lie detector thing. And in fact, he was on a TV show in 2005, 2004, somewhere in there, with F. Lee Bailey, who is a very famous attorney. And they had a show called Lie Detector, where they would bring back people from previous crimes and never took a lie detector, and they would give them one to see if they thought they were guilty or not guilty. He did the lie detector test for O.J. Simpson, for the Ramseys and the JonBenet Ramsey murder case. Very famous guy. And he used to work under contract. He retired from LAPD and he worked under contract. And he did a investigation for the Gap. And they had someone who was doing sweethearting at the register. Sweethearting is where you have a friend come in and they put like 4 pairs of jeans at $50 a piece up on the counter, and you ring it up as 4 pairs of socks at $10 a pair. They give you $40. You give them the receipt. They walk out. They have a receipt. Now the receipt's for the wrong thing, but they're fine, and you can chalk it up as a workplace error if the person gets caught, right, on the way out. But excuse me, you've arranged that with them, and the Gap had a problem with someone who was sweethearting jeans. Exactly that way. Had their friends come in, would ring up something totally different, same number of items, put the jeans in the bag, out they would walk with them. And then they had a scheme where they were bringing them back, saying they lost the receipt, but they still had the tags on them. They were getting the full value back. Ed asked the person, after they went through this entire process, and they admitted it, they wrote out their apology letter, and everything was good. Ed said, is there anything else that you would like to tell me that, just to get it off your chest? You've done the right thing. And he didn't really do this as a matter of practice. And he did that, and the person said, yeah, last Tuesday night, me and a buddy, we were downtown, and we killed a guy. What they'd done is, excuse me, there was a homeless person living in a cardboard box. They were 2 teenagers and out having what they thought was a good time, and they thought it would be funny to light the box on fire. And unfortunately, the person inside was passed out, and when he jumped out, he fell, actually hit his head, and died on the spot. So they were responsible for his murder, and they admitted to him, the one person admitted to him, that they indeed were involved in a murder. Now, I doubt very highly whether somebody's going to admit they murdered somebody. In my particular case, I asked the person, and they told me about another matter that ended up being a very large embezzlement case because they wanted to get it off their chest. They think they knew they were going to be fired, and they wanted to take down somebody on their way out, which is what they did. But they knew it. And when he asked that question, had I not asked that question, it may not have come out. So, always ask that question. Is there anything else? If they've gotten everything off their chest, they want a clean slate, give them the opportunity to do that. So there are some important housekeeping issues, if you will, with closure as well. And if you get these wrong, that can be disastrous. So once it's done, invite in either the HR manager or the person's manager or both, right? Not a big crowd. Someone in their chain of command and in front of the subject. Let them know that Bob has been cooperative, but Bob's going to need to be away from the workplace for a little while you finish up the investigation. Don't go into any details that Bob's admitted to anything unless they really push, but they shouldn't. You should prep them ahead of time that if something happens, you'll let them know. But that, there's reasons that Bob needs to be away from the workplace. Very calmly. And while you continue the investigation, and they'll say, okay. You ask the interviewee if they have any immediate needs, right? Anything in the workplace. When I talk about immediate needs, right? You got called into an interview, your car keys and your cell phone and, other personal effects you need to to get yourself out of there are in your workplace. Okay? Don't talk about, do you have any family pictures or anything like that? Don't make it so much so that it is a formal termination at that point. If you start telling them to take family pictures home, to go through their work effects and give them a cardboard box, that is a final thing. And you don't want that finality at that point. This person is vulnerable, they're raw. You just want to get them out peacefully, right? Just ask them if there's anything else, and then send somebody else to get them. You stay with the interviewee. Couple reasons. Again, they're vulnerable. You also don't want them to be walking back around when you're not there, talking to other people, letting them know what happened, or making excuses, or saying you're out to get them, toxifying the workplace, right? So once they get the things they need, somebody runs, gets their car keys, their glasses, their coat, lunchbox, whatever else they might need right then, right? Just the immediate needs. You walk them out, just you. Okay? You tell them to contact you going forward, no one else, not to call others from the workplace, right? They're still working for the company. Don't call others in the work group. Don't call the boss. Don't call HR. You only communicate with me going forward now. Okay? They're going to ask you, do I need a lawyer? And you always tell them that's their decision. Nothing's been decided here yet, because it hasn't. You haven't had the discussion with HR yet, right? Most likely Bob's going to go. He's going to be terminated. Nothing's been decided. Don't advise them they do need a lawyer, or don't ever tell them they don't. If they ask you that, and they will ask, do you think I need a lawyer? Nothing's been decided here yet. That's really your decision, Bob. But we haven't decided anything yet. In that case, they most likely will not, which makes things a little cleaner. But they certainly are able to do that if they want to. That's their legal right. And then tell them that, look, I'm going to need to get your access badge and your keys to hold while we figure this thing out. And I need you not to return and not to call anybody, like I said, until you get called by me. And if you have questions, you can call me, Bob. But I need you not to come back into the workplace and not to bother other people, not to call them, okay? And not to discuss this, especially with coworkers, because we're not done with this investigation yet. Bob will adhere to that. Now Bob's walking the straight and narrow. Very seldom will they violate that. Make sure you get their access badge and their keys just to hold, and emphasize, because when you take somebody's keys and their badge away, their ID badge for a company away, that is synonymous with being fired. So you need to tell them that I need to get those just to hold while we figure this out. That's the type of closure housekeeping that really has to be done. If not, you could have a very serious workplace violence incident, or if nothing else, somebody that's going to be impossible to get out of the workplace while they're yelling and screaming. Doing these things in the end are extremely important to keeping the workplace safe. And it's part of your responsibility as an investigator to make sure you close this thing out in that way. So we covered a lot, and we covered very little on this issue. As I said, I only gave you a couple of instances, baiting techniques, the steps through reconciliation and closure. Really did not even touch on what can be done in interviews. But I think you get the idea that this is not something you learn in 2 weeks, 15 weeks. You learn it over time. But these basics are things that you can use to build upon. Okay? Interviews take practice. Witness interviews can become subject interviews, whether you like it or not. So you need to be ready for any witness that even remotely might be involved in the actual wrongdoing. Be ready for that pivot point just in case it happens. Don't go to it unless you need to, unless you're very confident and your other evidence tells you that. But be ready. When a subject indicates leniency, and no second chance, I think the person deserves a second chance for something that not a reasonable person would think that someone deserves a second chance. That right there in and of itself should be a bell ringing for you to say this person either knows the person who did it or they themselves were involved. When you bait with plausible and easy landing scenarios, as I call them, right? The easiest way for them to explain why they did this, whether or not it's true or not. The subject doesn't care about giving you the real reason because it's probably something that's rather embarrassing. They'd rather tell you they stole $190 because they needed to pay for medicine for their sick child, rather than tell you they needed to pay for a weekend getaway with their mistress. But again, we just need to know they stole $190. We don't need to know why. Let them land in the softest place possible, as long as they land. Okay, when you find that sweet spot, You move to reconciliation. When they have accepted, they've either said, yeah, that's why I did it, or you've got them so close, you move on to that positive confrontation where you say, you know, our evidence says that you were involved. Say it with confidence. Don't say it as a question. Just tell them that's the fact. You did it. And listen to them a good portion of the time say, I did, or I was involved. I mean, they know. But now you've pretty much thrown it at them. And they will, in many cases, fold. It's just a human nature thing. If your evidence is strong from the start, always exhaust the baiting first. Exhaust it. Time doesn't matter in that case. It's on your side. Just keep going before you move to positive confrontation. If they still deny it at that point, then your interview is over because you're never going to take them over to reconciliation if they just say, heck no, I didn't do this. You're wrong. Okay. Fair enough. I know I'm not wrong because I have other evidence that can back this. I just would like to have an admission of this because it adds greatly to my end result. But if anything less than denial comes out of that baiting when it's exhausted, you move to help them build their defense through reconciliation. Take them down that path. Do the positive confrontation, which is really uncomfortable. But if you can take them down that reconciliation path, you are home free because that's when things start to build. Help them build their defense. Realistically, I mean, there isn't really one. There wasn't going to be one necessary, but help them build it anyway. So there was so much to absorb this week, and the lecture's a little longer than most. Not much, but I didn't add any reading. There is a quiz, and it's based only on this unit, only on interviews. But what I'd like you to do is to start to think about how you might get information on someone. Okay? Anybody. We're going to be talking about putting together a background reference for interviews. And maybe that should have come before this, but I think once you see how an interview is structured, now you might be able to have a better appreciation for the types of things that you need to bring in so that you have them for the conversation. So next week we're going to start talking about tools. So once you've done the lecture now, thank you for your attention on that. Once you've done with the quiz, I want you to start thinking about how you might get information on somebody. Heck, use me if you want to. I mean, I'm sure there's good and bad information about me out there somewhere. Not just using the internet, though. What other tools might you use? Where else could you get information on somebody? And I want you to start thinking about that because we're going to start discuss those tools, how to put together a good background for an interview starting next week. With that, have a great week. If you have questions or concerns about anything, this unit or others, please let me know. Have a great week.